Okay, so this is the second part. We've just looked at explanations for obedience, and there was quite a lot in there. So these next two parts will be a little bit shorter. Remember, again, you've got to be revising research methods alongside this because research methods questions could come up in this section. Now what we'll do is we'll have a look at explanations of resistance to social influence. So make sure you're aware of the wording of these bullet points as well. The first one is explanations for obedience. The second one is explanations of resistance to social influence. So because it says social influence, it is not just obedience, it's conformity too. So each of these explanations linked to obedience and conformity because it says social influence, and social influence within the topic we look at conformity and obedience. Okay, so please be aware of that and make sure you look at the wording of the question because it might say resistance to conformity, or in the item it might be conformity, it might not be obedience, or if it says social influence it could be either. So please really think about the wording of the question for this. So, resistance to social influence refers to the ability of people to withstand the social pressure to conform to the majority or obey authority. There's two explanations within this: social support and locus of control. Social support is the presence of other people who resist pressures to conform or obey, and these individuals can help others do the same. So if you have someone who acts as a model and they resist social influence, so they do not conform or they do not obey, then they act as a model to others and others can follow in that pattern and follow that behavior. Then we have locus of control, which is the sense to which we believe we have direct control of the event in our lives. And there's two types, there's internals and externals. We'll start with social support. So within social support, there's two different things that we need to look at. We need to look at why social support leads individuals to resist conformity and why social support leads individuals to resist obedience. So with regards to resisting conformity, we're going to look at a variation of ASH. So even though ASH is not mentioned specifically in the advanced information, it is important for you to have an overall idea of ASH and ASH's research. So this was the Lyme study. So get your key studies sheet out, have a little look at ASH, refresh your memory on ASH, and maybe write a few bullet points down just so you can remember what ASH's research is about. So when you're thinking about this variation, you can compare it to the original piece of research if necessary. So with regards to the social support variation of ASH, when one of the Confederates agreed with the participants, conformity fell to 5.5%. So you will remember that when they went round the individuals and asked them about the lines, everyone gave an incorrect answer, and then the participant was asked for their answer, and often they would conform and they would give an incorrect answer. However, if when they were going round those Confederates, one of them gave the correct answer, then that participant would also give a correct answer because they had social support there. Okay, so they were less likely to conform to the majority if they had social support. It fell to 5.5%. When we look at social support and how it links to resisting obedience, we're looking at Milgram again. So refresh yourself about the baseline study of Milgram. And in this variation of Milgram's experiment, there were other teachers. These other teachers were actually Confederates. And what they would do is they would put a Confederate teacher with the participant teacher. And if the Confederate teacher disobeyed the experimenter, 90% of the participants also disobeyed. Okay, so that shows that if they had another individual who acted as a model and said, no, I'm not doing this, I'm not continuing with this experiment, then you would see that individual as a model and stop. Okay, so that's the example from Milgram. So you need to be aware of ASH, you need to be aware of Milgram and the social support variations of both. So in both cases, the Confederates act as a model of independent behaviour, making it easier for others to follow. So we have some evaluation for the idea of social support. Couple of points here. So we've got research support from the real world. So Albrecht et al. Evaluated a program called Teen Fresh Start USA. So this was designed to help pregnant adolescents resist the pressure to smoke. And they had a buddy who was their social support. And they found that if adolescents had a buddy, they were less likely to smoke than those who didn't have a buddy. So that's the idea that if you've got social support, then you're less likely to conform to your peers, and you're more able to resist that pressure. We also have additional research from Gamson et al., and they found high levels of resistance in their study compared to Milgram's, and they believed it was because participants were allowed to discuss what they were told to do in groups. So it was similar to a Milgram style experiment, and they were given an order to follow. And after they were given that order, they were put in groups and they were able to discuss that order and what they had been told to do. And because they were given that opportunity to discuss, it lent itself to peer support for dissenting ideas. So if an individual said, well, no, actually, I disagree with what we've been told to do, I don't think we should do it like that, then you're able to have that discussion and peers are able to act as models like independently, which would happen in real life. So with regards to social support, it's an alternative explanation as to why people resist social influence, and it includes resisting conformity and resisting obedience. What you can do, if you like, is you can use the resisting obedience variation as sort of an evaluation point and an alternative explanation compared to to explain why not everyone obeyed in Milgram's experiment and why not everyone went through why some people might not enter an agentic state in real life. They might not enter an agentic state in real life because they might see someone else who disobeys, or they which is evident in some case studies from World War II. And also you can use social support just to say, well, actually, when we're explaining social influence, it's actually really complex. There's lots of different factors that can be at play, if that makes sense. And then we've got locus of control. So with regard to locus of control, this was developed by Rotter in 1966. He suggested that some people have an internal locus of control and they believe that they have control over events in their life. And others have an external locus of control and they believe that things that happen are outside of their control. So for example, if you had an internal locus of control and you were not doing very well in an assessment, you would believe that actually I've got control over this. If I want to do better, then I can revise more. I can focus on what went wrong and I can make a change. And I didn't do very well because maybe I didn't do that extra hour of revision, or I didn't check through my target sheets and I didn't look at example answers. If you had an external locus of control, then it might be, well, I didn't do very well in the exam because the bus driver made me late and then I was really stressed and it was raining and my friend didn't go through this revision with me. We didn't pick that topic. And I'm just a really unlucky person. And the questions that came up were not my questions. And you would believe that what happened in your assessment was due to all of these external factors. So you would believe that to do better, well, I need better questions to come up. I need the questions that I revised to come up, because if this question comes up, then I'm not going to do very well and I can't control what questions come up in the exam. However, people are not just internal or external. So you're not at one, you can be at one extreme end or the other extreme end, so very high internal or very high external, but often people are somewhere in the middle and their position may vary. It might vary over time. People with a high internal locus of control are more able to resist the pressure to conform or obey. And this is because they take responsibility for their actions and they're less likely to depend on the opinions of others. So they tend to be more self-confident, more achievement orientated, and more confident in their ideas and their beliefs. So, for example, if someone sat Ash's experiment and they had a high internal locus of control, they wouldn't rely on the answers of other individuals. They would just believe in their own answer and believe in the correct answer, and they wouldn't conform. Which could explain why Ash doesn't have 100% conformity. It could be because individuals that were questioned, because they were university students as well, had this high internal locus of control. We've got some more research to support this idea of locus of control affecting resisting social influence. So Holland repeated Milgram study and found that whether participants were internals or externals affected their behaviour. So he found that 37% of internals didn't continue to 450 volts, so they resisted that social influence, whereas only 23% of externals did not continue. So internals showed a greater level of resistance to authority. However, it's not 100%, is it? So it's still not a complete explanation for resistance to social influence. We've also got some contradictory research. So in this contradictory research, they analysed data from American locus of control studies from 1960 to 2002, and they found that actually people became more resistant to obedience, but they actually became more external. So they weren't internal, but they were still resisting obedience. That they were kind of like the trends. So it kind of like is the opposite to what you would expect to see. So it suggests that locus of control is not a valid explanation of resistance, and there must be something else at play to explain why individuals resist social influence. And that other explanation could be social support, or it could be if there's other factors at play, so like dispositional factors, or situational factors as well. So it just suggests that social influence is a really complex idea. Social support, we've got evidence to suggest that it can affect social influence and it can affect an individual's ability to resist conformity and resist obedience. And locus of control also gives us evidence, but neither of them are complete explanations of why individuals resist social influence. Okay, so we've looked at explanations for obedience and we've looked at explanations for resistance to social influence. Again, with this topic, have a little look through. I do apologise, there's a few spelling mistakes on these slides. Have a look through, make some notes. If there's anything extra in your notes that you want to add, then add that in. You might want to, again, like for the social support, you might want to do some graphs to show the differences between the original study of Ash and the variation for social support, and same with Milgram and the variation. Just make sure that you're aware when you are revising this topic that you're looking at resistance to social influence, and you need to be really careful with that question because it could be resistance to obedience, it could be resistance to conformity, which would affect the research that you would put down and the explanations that you would use, or it could be social influence, which would include both. Okay, so have a look through that, make some notes, complete the bits of the worksheet, and then in part 3, I will go through the final bit, which is minority influence.